Welcome to the I Love Buffalo podcast. Part of the I Love Buffalo network with your host, Josh Catry.
Welcome to the I Love Buffalo podcast. I'm your host, Josh Catry. This week on the podcast, prison guards are threatened with arrest for striking for better working conditions. I get personally called out for the logo for this podcast, and as a result, I step into an underground world of graffiti artists I never knew existed. Landlords and tenants are getting letters from the government to search their property without due process. Package thieves on Elmwood face a surprise. So you want to be an entrepreneur in Buffalo, New York? Part 3. And a music venue in Buffalo faces challenges from the SLA. All this and more on this episode of the I Love Buffalo podcast.
I gotta sit in the lunchroom just to reread this. I could barely breathe as I drown in the sea. The same salmon swimming upstream like George Romero standing. So cram them little boxes wearing watches as time ticks. Speaking slow, eating crow. Better get the Heimlich. I'm sick and fed up with this blight. Now I'm storming, but I gotta get to bed cause I gotta work in the morning.
That right there was Pseudo Intellectuals with DJ Cutler and guitarist VJ Brown. One of my favorite Buffalo albums of all time called Dope Grindwork. It's one of those albums you can listen straight through pretty much to every song, and they're all really good. And it's fusion music, so it's like hip-hop mixed with jazz, mixed with rock. It's excellent. I highly advise checking that out. Again, Pseudo Intellectuals. Our top story this week is the prison guard strike. The prison guard strike in New York affects nearly all 42 prisons, and it's now in its second week. And this stems from officers asking for safer working conditions, and specifically repealing the HALT Act, H-A-L-T Act, which limits solitary confinement. So there is like a balance you have to find between how you can treat inmates and the safety of a prison, because a prison's a dangerous place. The current argument is that because of the HALT Act and other changes, the prisons have become too soft and there's not disciplinary action that can be had in order to control violence in the prisons. And assaults both on inmates and officers is going up and making it a dangerous work environment. And the argument continues that if something like this was happening in a regular business, the state would absolutely be on the side of the employees striking, saying, hey, we demand better working conditions. This is unsafe working conditions. But in this case, the state wields some extra power, and that power is particularly cited in the Taylor Law. And the Taylor Law bans public sector strikes. In retaliation to this, the state has deployed the National Guard to help maintain prison security and also threaten legal action against everyone striking with court orders and also suspending things like health insurance for the employees. While negotiations between state officials and the prisoners' guard union are ongoing, the tensions are super high still, as both sides remain struggling to reach a resolution. According to a statement by the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, COs continuing to take part in this illegal job action are violating the law, and they will be considered absent without leave, AWOL, and are being docked pay for every day they're on strike. Also, as a result of their status, the state will terminate their state-sponsored health insurance. In addition, those participating in the illegal job action will face administrative penalties along with department discipline for violating the state's Taylor Law. I spoke off the record to a CO who said that he was basically waiting for the state police to show up and arrest him for striking, and he was very concerned with the increase in violence and assaults in the prison that he works at, and very concerned that the rules are being made by people who aren't inside the system itself. Now, for a state that's supposed to be pro-union, like New York State's supposed to be pro-union, these tactics seem kind of over the top and dirty to me, especially the health insurance. Many of these officers have kids, and they want to be safe and not get injured or not get hurt on the job. And at the same time, they want safer conditions and the state responds by taking health insurance away from them, that doesn't seem like a very reasonable and rational representation. Now, as you'll hear me reference quite often on this podcast, I talk about decentralized and transparent problem-solving groups called collective intelligence groups. And the way to come to solutions with things like this is you bring everyone together. You shouldn't make rules for a prison without talking to the prison guards and to the inmates and to the legislators. Everyone should be involved in the conversation here. But what happened here with the HALT Act, this was championed by lawmakers who had never worked a day in their life inside of a prison, and they didn't consult any of the inmates or guards or people it directly affected. Also, again, this is another policy that's being made without data and results on the line. When we make rules or laws for a system, they should be results driven, which means we should tie them to metrics. And some of the metrics here seem to be complaints from inmates on unfair treatment, but also injuries, assaults, gang violence, drug use in prisons. All of these things need to be considered before just making a rule and forcing it upon people. This rule seems to have unintended consequences that are hurting people. And we have to face the truth and face the metrics behind that. We shouldn't be putting people's lives at risk, not just the guards, but also the inmates. You know, some inmates are there just to do their time and not be involved in violence, and they should be able to do that as well. And if there's one or two inmates that are being violent towards others, they should be isolated from the other inmates. Right now, the corrections officers don't have the ability to do this because of the HALT Act. A huge majority of the problems in our lives, in all of our lives, are caused by bad systems, either systems that are fully corrupted or partially corrupted, so they're working for the people who are corrupting the system instead of for the people who are affected by the system, or the rules are made in a top-down fashion without including everyone. And when you make a system like this and you make rules like this, it doesn't work. There's always going to be problems. There's a reasonable and rational way for this to be solved. There are ways to have strict enforcement and consequences for the actions of bad inmates to be put in solitary confinement or separated away from the crowd or punishment of some kind that are not cruel and unusual, but at the same time, keep the officers safe, the inmates safe, and the whole system humane, fair, and just. Again, this all comes down to how people solve problems in groups. There are much, much better ways that we can solve problems in groups than what we're seeing right here. It's testable. And it starts with something called collective intelligence systems. And we'll get into this in the future. We'll give some examples of collective intelligence systems being used right here in Buffalo, New York. But for bargaining, for collective bargaining, especially against the state which holds the power here, the state in this case is different than a business because the state can force you to go to work. I mean, what is forced labor normally called? You can't really force someone to go to work. If they don't want to go to work and they want to bargain against the state, they should be allowed to bargain against the state. This reminds me a little bit of like, there's legislation right now that's going through a few states where the state is trying to make it illegal for citizens to sue the state for being sick or poisoned from Roundup or glyphosate sprayed on your foods. Like, why should corporations be shielded from tort law or from lawsuits? And why should the state be shielded from a union? The state that claims that they're pro-union is using the iron boot of government to shut down this kind of protest. And I get it. There's inmates in there that, you can't just walk out on it. Just like schools. You can't just like walk out on schools without there being consequences. But there should be some way to address this that we all agree with. And it's got to be better than this. But in this case, it's safety. Have empathy for a second. Picture you being a prison guard or someone you love being a prison guard. And there's no real way to stop the violence by separating people anymore. And as a result of that, the working conditions are a lot scarier. A lot scarier. I think a lot of the problem that we have in society when it's us versus them or left versus right or up versus down is the lack of empathy for each other. And that can be solved by finding better ways to bargain. The HALT Act was clearly a law put in place that didn't listen to anyone in the system It came from the top down. It didn't take into consideration results. And now that we're seeing bad results, the defense to it is to be mad at the corrections officers because they want a safe work environment in such a way that you're going to repeal their health insurance. There are countless laws on the books that are not tied to results. And I think it should be illegal. I think that every single law we put on the books should have to be tied to results. And if they do not achieve the results the law is supposed to get, that we rethink the law. There's a sunset to the law. Like the law can last for 2 years, and after 2 years, it's reviewed. And if the results are not coming, then the law is repealed or changed or re-edited. People in top-down positions do not know what is best for the rest of everyone else because they're not inside the system. And this is a bad way to run systems. There should be laws. There should be rules. There should be ways to protect the inmates too from being abused. And yes, there's been a lot of court cases and several examples of horrible instances where inmates were beat up really bad by corrections officers and things like this. Those corrections officers should be handled individually. They don't represent everyone, and we shouldn't change all of the laws to something super radical in the opposite direction because of a few outliers. What we should do is be rational and reasonable, but most of all, we should base our policies on results. So as this continues to unfold, we'll keep you updated. But as of right now, there's still a major strike going on and tensions are high. All right, the Sabres were back in action the other night and they win 8-2 over the Rangers, which is a big win. A lot of people think they are just not in the playoffs, and they are in last place, but there's a tight race right above them. If they get a streak going, they can be in the hunt once again. They just need to put some wins together. But this next clip, usually we don't like to swear on this podcast. We try to keep it clean, professional, but it's too funny not to share. Here's a clip of Rob Ray. He was doing reporting from the penalty box, and he gets hit with a puck in the face. So moms, if you don't want to hear some swearing, put some earmuffs on your kids for a second. It only will last a minute.
Puck is dropped, and it's 4-0 here in the opening period. And Razor just took another one.
Sorry, I don't know why I wanted to include that, but I just did because when I watched it in real time, it was so funny. Everyone around me was laughing, and he's okay. He took a puck right to the forehead. He's a tough dude, and it's just funny how that sneaked through on TV. And we could sneak things in like that in the podcast, especially with a fair warning here. In this next clip here, we're going to keep pretty brief, but there are letters going out to landlords and to tenants that their property is going to be inspected by the city's Department of Permits and Inspection Services as part of a proactive rental inspection program that was initiated in 2020. And this program's point is to ensure that the rental properties meet health, safety things, particular focus on eliminating lead-based paint hazards, things like this. And they've already done letters out to thousands of units, and a bunch of landlords and tenants are receiving these letters, and they're required to schedule an inspection and obtain a certificate of rental compliance. But many landlords and even tenants are pushing back against this, including a group that's raising a potential Fourth Amendment concern and starting a lawsuit calling it unconstitutional searches, because their argument is that there are already ways for tenants to file grievances. They can call it 311 to report code violations, unsafe living conditions, or unresponsive landlords. And this is things like, no heat, no water, lead hazards, mold or pest infestations, structural issues, things like this. As you know, the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, meaning the government cannot just enter private property without a warrant, consent, or there being some kind of circumstances, like maybe someone called 311, for example. And courts have consistently ruled that even rental properties are protected, meaning inspectors can't just force entry without a warrant or the landlord's permission or the tenant's permission. And if landlords or tenants are being compelled to allow inspectors without a warrant, this could be challenged in court, and it looks like it's going to be, as an unconstitutional search. The way courts work is set on precedents, and other court districts have already ruled on similar cases, such as Camara versus Municipal Court in 1967, and the Supreme Court then ruled that administrative inspections like housing code enforcement require either consent or a warrant. And court cases in other cities, such as Chicago and San Francisco, have successfully argued and challenged mandatory inspections on Fourth Amendment grounds. So as this unfolds, we'll keep you posted. This seems relatively fresh in terms of the letters going out and the people banding together to file lawsuits back against the government. All right, in this next segment here, I got called out personally on the internet for the logo for this podcast. And if you've seen the logo, it is a heart in a bubble, in a word bubble. And truthfully, I got it from looking around Buffalo. We were always going to call this the I Love Buffalo podcast. And someone suggested, why don't you use that little heart in a bubble that you see everywhere with the stick figure guy with the backpack? I'm sure almost anyone from Buffalo knows what I'm talking about. The graffiti art you see around town, it's a stick figure with a little backpack and a word bubble coming out of his mouth with a red heart or blue heart or different color hearts sometimes inside that word bubble. Now, yes, I absolutely associated that with Buffalo, just like a Sabres logo or the Bills logo or many other things that you see in Buffalo. Chicken wings and beef on weck, and there's stick figure guy with a little bubble coming out of his mouth. At the time, we had no idea it belonged to a particular artist. In my mind, I thought it was like a peace symbol where different artists did it. And it was all over the place, and it was kind of just a symbol of Buffalo. Well, turns out that it belongs to a very particular graffiti artist, and online, he goes by the name Guy Figure Stick. And so Guy Figure Stick actually pretty nicely called us out and said, hey, why don't you let me, the artist who makes that, make your logo for you? And I was like, all right, first of all, I want to apologize. I did not know that belonged to a particular artist. And even though it's a graffiti artist, which is, by most accounts, illegal art, still belongs to that person's creativity. So apologies there. And this person invited me to come to a place called the Writer's Block and meet with him. This was kind of interesting because I went to this place by myself, and they kind of buzz you in, and there's a representative there named Writer who was super nice. We vibed really well, and we talked about how we can make this right. And so we agreed to pay them to make our logo 100% by the artists. And let me tell you something, inside of this place, this Writer's Block place, there are all these different rooms. It's almost like an art collective with different rooms and different artists in each room. And some of the graffiti artists would put their art on things like stop signs or things that they bought at thrift shops or garage sales. And they would all put their art on it and then sell that piece of art with all the iconic Buffalo graffiti on it to collectors and make an honest living off of it. I didn't know this whole world existed. I got to admit, it was a little bit scary walking into this building alone, not knowing anyone, knowing there was a slight criminal element to what I was walking into. And I was treated in the beginning as such. Apparently, they treat everyone like they think you're a cop. And I was okay with that. I was like, okay, you can think I'm a cop, but I'm very visible. It's easy to know that I'm not a cop. You can look into that. And secondly, I'm here to try to make it right because of the fact that I'm using someone else's art. We didn't know that. And we're trying to make that right. And we're glad that we were able to work that out. And so Writer, that was the name that the person went by that represented the artist. I dealt with him. We struck a deal, and they're making an updated version of our logo, and they're going to spray paint the logo on a piece of canvas so we can have it right here in the podcast studio. Now, I've always had mixed feelings when it comes to graffiti. So I don't like the idea of people's private property getting ruined by graffiti. However, first of all, I love murals, and Buffalo is well known for murals, and there's all different kinds of murals all over Buffalo, including ones done by this artist that people pay them for. But secondly, sometimes graffiti is necessary. Like, I give examples like the Berlin Wall. When your government is silencing your speech, oftentimes graffiti is the way to lash out against that. And the Berlin Wall was an example of this. And when there's graffiti on public government-owned buildings and things like that have a statement, I'm a little bit more empathetic to what that means. That being said, this stick figure guy with a heart bubble is some of the nicest graffiti I've ever seen. It's sending a message, of love. Speak love. To add to that, some of the sheer feats where some of this graffiti ends up is just insane and amazing. And he let me in on a couple places that were very, very challenging. And one of those is the top of the Grand Island Bridge. To me, that's wildly insane. But when I look at it, what is it? A blue bridge with a little logo up there now that represents Buffalo, that's fine. I mean, there's other artists like this around, and people really seem to get behind those kind of artists that send good messages. The most famous being Banksy, who draws things about anti-war and love and things like that. And Stick Figure Guy is one of those things. Either way, I was grateful for being allowed to come into this world a little bit and check it out and have an honest and open conversation with some people that I've never had conversations with before, and to hear a little bit about their story. And even though we might not all agree with all of graffiti all around, I think it's hard for us to say that there's not a more iconic version than what's going on with Stick Figure Guy and the little heart bubble there. So that's my story of meeting the artist behind the iconic figure. In our last episode, we did a segment about carnivore diet and how it has affected my life. And it's affected my life, like I said, in very positive ways. And shortly after that podcast, had someone reach out to the social media pages of the podcast here, and we connected and had a conversation. And it turns out that they solved their problem in a similar way. And their problem was much more dire. They were basically being left to die. It sounded like they had an autoimmune disease that made their skin basically fall off because they would get boils and rashes so bad that chunks would fall off. And the disease usually results in death. And the doctor said, all we can do basically is give you comfort. And that was it. And this person probably thought what I thought when I was going through my troubles with autoimmune problems. My doctor is not thinking about me when he's at home or she's at home. I'm still thinking about me. I still have a problem, and I'm capable of solving problems. And that's what a disease is. A disease is a problem. Everything is problems. If you approach it that way, problems have solutions. If you say you have an issue, that's going to go on forever. Maybe. Issues don't have solutions. But if you believe your disease is a problem and that it's solvable, you can at least start going in the right direction. Had this girl that called me not been an advocate for herself, she would have probably died what sounds like a horrible death. I mean, it was hard to listen to, and I'm sorry if it's hard for you to listen to, but that was the truth. So kudos to this girl for being an advocate for herself and for not stopping until she found the solutions. She looked and tried to find step one, first identify the problem correctly, which the doctors were not identifying correctly. And then step two, find people who have solved the problem. Luckily, there was a good medicine that helped slow the problem down, but she would have had to stay on that medicine for life had she not adjusted her inputs and stopped what was causing the disease. And she did that in a very similar way that I did, controlling your inputs. Your inputs are food, water, chemicals, air, medicine. If you look around, step two for solving a problem after you identify it should be to try to find other people that are solving the problem. And the problem of chronic illness is being solved by one group of people right now, and that group of people is not Western medicine. Western medicine is masking symptoms, but they're not solving the problem. There is a group of people solving the problem at a very high rate, and that high rate correlates to inputs. And if you're sick, or you know anyone who's sick, and you're not trying to control your inputs, just maybe consider that there's another way. Anyone who's suffering, I don't wish that on anyone. It's scary, but it doesn't have to be this way, I don't think. At least a huge portion of it doesn't have to be this way. All of it, I don't know. But knowledge is how we end suffering. Knowledge is how we end evil, and knowledge is how we help each other. And the easiest way to find that knowledge is to find other people solving the same problem that you have. To the person that reached out, thank you. Really appreciate you reaching out. It requires courage to reach out, be vulnerable, and tell your story, even to me, and I appreciate that. And if anyone out there is listening and you're sick, treat it like a problem. You don't have any other choice. The only other choice is to lay down. Don't do that. Okay, in this next segment here, we're going to talk about a rise in package theft in the Elmwood Village. So the Amazon trucks and the UPS trucks are dropping off packages, and there's a surge in these thefts around Richmond and Elmwood and all these areas over here. And so they interview a bunch of people in the neighborhood, and a lot of people are sad. They say things like, it makes you lose faith in humanity when your packages get stolen. And it happens so often at this point that it's no longer surprising. First, I like to correct this rhetoric when I hear this, people saying that most of society is bad or wants to do evil. This is wrong, and it's the wrong outlook to have for humanity. This is the city of good neighbors, and most people in this town want to do good by each other. But this is true worldwide. If given the option, well over 95% of people will collaborate with other people, will collaborate with their neighbors, will help their neighbors. There's only a very small percentage of people that won't. And this isn't my opinion. This is based on a lot of behavioral tests and behavioral economics and psychology, study of evolutionary biology and things like this. There are different tests and games that scientists have played to see how people would behave. Would they collaborate or would they rip each other off? One of them is called the ultimatum game. There's another one, I think it's called the public goods game. And then, like I mentioned last time, the prisoner's dilemma game, the trust game. There's all these different things. And most people, on average, would way rather collaborate with their neighbor than rip their neighbor off. Our problem is when we have bad systems. And we have bad systems and you go outside and you're like, oh, this looks awful. There's just horrible things going on. I must also rip people off in order to just survive. And when that happens, the number of people that will rip each other off goes up because of the bad systems. But had they had good systems all along and opportunities, that number would stay low and probably even go lower. But now that we cleared that up, we still have this problem where people are stealing packages. It's really hard to stop that because you have the Amazon truck or the UPS truck driving around. It seems like these people are following the truck, then you drop off the package, and then the people run up right away and steal the package and take off with it. Now, I don't want to advocate for vigilante justice, but I am going to say this. There are some amazing YouTube videos of vigilante justice and package thieves just like these ones. And in these videos online, they do things like they fill the package with stink bombs. And when the thieves open it, it blows up in their car and their car smells horrible. Or they have little contraptions in there that shoot tacks out or glitter bombs. There are other ones where they fill the box with live spiders or snakes or itchy powder. Or they do things like put things in there that talk to you or fly out or track it or are super sticky so when you touch it, your hand gets glued to it or explodes flour in your face. I've even heard of ones where they put a beehive inside of the box so you open it and there's wasps flying out or bees or things like this. I'm sorry to say it, but this kind of thievery, the vigilante justice is pretty awesome. Maybe some of the illegal artists out there who live nearby might want to get involved in some vigilante justice here. Spray paint a box with a logo on it, and when they open it, they don't get love. They get a box full of bees in the face. Either way, this is one of those criminal elements where packages are getting stolen. That's kind of hard to figure out. I mean, it's hard to police that as a police officer, and it's hard to stop it. So what are you supposed to do? I'll leave that up to you, Buffalo. But I think having some packages that are not very nice to steal might dissuade a few people. A few packages of urine samples or a box of dead, disgusting fish or whatever. There's got to be some creative yet legal ways to discourage these types of acts from happening to our communities. And most importantly, restoring faith in humanity once again. All of this while upholding our reputation as the City of Good Neighbors. Speaking of City of Good Neighbors and Elmwood, Jackrabbit, which is a music venue on Elmwood there, is facing some criticism from the neighbors for being too loud, and the SLA has gotten involved, and they're trying to basically limit the kinds of bands they can have and the timelines and things like this. This is a sticky situation, and it seems like it's a very few number of neighbors. It would seem to me that if you bought a house on the Elmwood Strip or Chippewa or wherever there's a lot of restaurants and bars and action, that you'd kind of take that into consideration. Same thing with Hurdle. Any of these areas, it's going to be louder. It's going to be more fun. And if you're going to be the neighbor that complains, and apparently there's only a couple neighbors here that are complaining. Most people are for the live music. I would be for it. I would want to have live music in my neighborhood. I wish there was live music in my neighborhood. But I'm in a neighborhood where there's probably not an expectation of late live music. On Elmwood, there would be an expectation of late live music. And they've tried to soundproof it and all of this. So the State Liquor Authority is stepping in and giving ultimatums. And there's a petition online. So if you care about live music, check that petition out. Sign it if you want to. As you all know, I'm a big proponent of live music in Buffalo. I think it's hard to make it as an artist. And our city has great live music. And Jackrabbit is one of those venues that helps give artists a start. It's a place where they can start and have a built-in crowd. And I hope they can figure this out. Maybe there's a compromise. I don't know all the details, but the details are listed online on the petition. And if this interests you, please go check that out. In this final segment here, we're going to cover So You Want to Be an Entrepreneur, Part 3. And as promised last week, we're going to discuss the book, The E-Myth, or The Entrepreneurial Myth. And this book, I can summarize it very quickly. There's two parts to the book, the first part and the second part. I kind of strongly disagree with the second part of the book, where it talks about how you should try to turn every business into a franchise or sell the business. I don't agree with this. I think businesses can do good. They should do good. And so I ignore the second half of that book. But the first half, I think is very important. I think it's vital to understanding entrepreneurship. And in fact, the Fortune 500 CEOs were asked to recommend one book to read in order to be a CEO. And this was the number one book, The E-Myth, The Entrepreneurial Myth, and it's called Revisited. I think there might have been a first copy, and the second copy is the revisited copy. And the book can be summarized very simply like this. Most people that start a business don't actually start a business. They start a job. And what does that mean? That means Kelly's Bakery, or Frank's Barbershop, or Tom's Cleaning Service. These are things where most people have to work inside the business. And this is okay to start a business like this, but you have to come up with a plan to eventually hand off your duties to other people and move up so you're working on the business and not in the business. If your plan is only to work in the business, you just created a job for yourself. And creating a job for yourself might have some upsides and some benefits to it, but the downsides are huge. Paying taxes and payroll and all of these things that come with starting your own business, finding your own sales. This becomes very difficult unless you have a plan to eventually hand those things off. So I recommend when you start a business, think of it like a system. And even if it's a one-person business to start, you should be creating a system that you can hand off to the next person and let them be creative in that position. So your creativity is being infused when you first have it, and then you should hire someone and hand it off. To me, the biggest challenge in a business is going from N of 1 to N of 2. And what do I mean by that? 1 employee to 2 employees. That step is always the most difficult because it's the trickiest. It's the one with a lot of red tape. A lot of people don't realize how you do that. And it's tricky. It's not easy. Plus, you have to eat into your profits in order to afford that. I've been part of businesses before that didn't want to add employees because they looked at it as an expense. In my opinion, you should look at this as not an expense, but rather an investment. You invest in the people, you give them a job, you make your business transparent. You say, listen, if this thing grows, you're going to get taken care of too. And then you all grow together. And that investment will pay off in the end if you do it the right way. But it is a scary step. And it is the most important thing that the book, The E-Myth, taught me when I read it. I highly recommend this book, at least the first half of it. It's super short. So it's like, maybe a couple hundred pages long at the most. And you can ignore the second half of the book totally. just check out the first half of the book because that's where the meat and potatoes are. Going from 0 employees to 1 employee, 2 employees and on. And working on your business versus working in your business and understanding what that means. When I first read this book, I was working in a business that I had started and I felt trapped. I felt like I had to be there all the time. It was pulling me in many different directions. And this really opened my eyes to what kind of expectations I should have for the business and how to build systems and how to look at a business as a system. And each department, its own system that you hand off to new employees and let those people be creative and then help you grow. Here's a short clip from the book, The E-Myth.
Should you ditch your boss and start a business? If you already know how to produce a product or service people pay for, why not build a business around it? Let's say you're an awesome graphic designer and you work in a graphic design studio. You know people love your designs, so you decide to start your own graphic design company. You start with a few existing clients. They recommend a few more clients. Soon you're busy and you don't have a boss anymore. Life's great. You feel like a kid on the first day of summer after a long school year. But soon you're putting in 14-hour days to do the design work and all the other little things you need to do to keep the business running. After a few weeks of working these 14-hour days, you decide you need to hire an experienced administrative assistant to deal with all the administrative work you don't want to do. You also decide to hire an experienced marketer to do the marketing work you don't have time to do. You trust that these experienced people will know what they need to do because they've worked in similar positions in the past. Now you've got people doing the work you don't want to do, and you can focus on what you do best, producing beautiful graphic designs. But just when you think it's going well, your administrative assistant leaves, and what's worse, she's put all your financial data in a software program you're not familiar with. It's a complete disaster. And on top of that, the marketing person you hired isn't producing ads the way you want them. You decide to let him go and do the marketing yourself. Now you need to put in 18-hour days to clean up the mess and do the backlog of design work. Your project starts to suffer, deadlines get missed, quality drops, and clients are getting pissed off. You thought when you started your business, you got rid of your boss. But now it feels like you have a boss again. And this boss doesn't give you a day off and barely gives you enough money to pay rent. How did you get yourself into this mess? You're in this mess because you built a business that relies on you. In the book, The E-Myth Revisited, author Michael Gerber says if your business depends on you, you don't own a business, you have a job. And it's the worst job in the world. The top priority for a business owner is to create a business that produces a great product or service without them. In other words, an entrepreneur doesn't produce a product or service. An entrepreneur creates a system that produces a great product or service and removes themselves from the process. If you own a bakery, you don't want to bake the best cakes in town. You want to build a system and hire people to bake the best cakes in town.
A common theme on this podcast is going to be solving problems with systems. So you've heard me talk about jujitsu as a system that you solve the problem of fighting with. All around us, there are problems. And if you can solve those problems with systems, systems are more reliable than people. So a system of exercise, a system of food, a system of how you solve problems, a system of time management. Everything in your life could be a better system, and you use discipline to adhere to the system. Entrepreneurship is no different. We must approach it like we're solving problems with systems. Yes, it's okay to start off working inside of your business. In fact, some people enjoy working inside their business. But if you want it to grow, whatever system you're working on, you need to eventually hand that off to someone else and work on the bigger system next. If you keep this kind of philosophy in mind, you can end up really enjoying starting your own business instead of feeling trapped inside of it. And from personal experience, I've been parts of both kinds of businesses, ones where I feel trapped and ones where I'm working on it more than I'm working in it. In the next episode of So You Want to Be an Entrepreneur in Buffalo, New York, we're going to take a look at solving what's called the agent principal problem. And we're also going to look at the importance of separating yourself from your competition. As usual, here is the list of things to do this week in Buffalo. And as a reminder, if you have any interesting things coming up in an event or things like this, please message the social media pages of this podcast so that we can know about them. It's hard to figure out what's going on everywhere in Buffalo all at once. We check like 50 websites, but it's a lot easier if you want your event mentioned. Just please message us and we'll mention it on here if we have time. On Thursday, we have Cats at Shays. Friday and Saturday at Canal Side, there's the ice bumper cars again. That's always fun. And this is available pretty much all day from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. February 28th, there's Mardi Gras Boozy Bingo at Buffalo Riverworks. This is super fun if you've never been to a Boozy Bingo event before. Sabres play the Ducks on Tuesday, and then the Canadians on Saturday. Both games are at 7 o'clock. And then next Monday, there's WWE Raw at the arena as well. Blues guitarist Joe Bonamassa is at Shays on February 25th. Kaleidoball is March 1st at the Convention Center. Sasquatch is on February 28th at Ironworks in the Cobblestone District. There's the opera at Kleinhans on Saturday at 8 o'clock called La Traviata. There's the Buffalo Wine and Chocolate Festival on Saturday at Statler City from 6 to 9 p.m. On March 1st in Niagara Falls, there's the Greater Niagara Fishing Expo. That's 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at the Niagara Falls Convention Center. On March 1st and 2nd, there's a car show at the fairgrounds in Hamburg with hot rods, customs, classics, and motorcycles, along with some live music and a pinup contest. And then on Saturday, March 1st, is one of my favorite bands in Buffalo. They're playing for free with no cover, a show at Pearl Street Grill and Brewery at 9 o'clock. They're called Roy G. Biv. And as their name suggests, Roy G. Biv, it's all the colors of the rainbow. They'll play all genres. So they play all different kinds of music from funk to rock to jam. And they do a lot of originals too. And they're really good. I actually have family coming in from out of town this week, and we plan on hanging out there on Saturday night. So stop in and say hello and check out one of Buffalo's best upcoming bands, in my opinion, Roy G. Biv. And the last thing we're going to do here is shout out a local business. This one is called East Leaf Dispensary. So East Leaf is located right now currently on Clinton Street, Clinton and Harlem, in the plaza there, where there is a Consumer's Beverages inside the plaza. They're right next door. Super nice facility, super clean facility. They actually sponsored a music series last summer that I was part of, and they were a great partner. They helped us bring some excellent music here to Buffalo, some free live music for brunch on Sundays. The owner, Glenn, has a great story that I hope to tell on this podcast someday. He was one of those people that kind of got caught up in drug laws back in the day when they were draconian, and turned it all around and now has his own business going and is opening a second location from what I hear in East Aurora. So if you're into recreational cannabis and you're in the area of Clinton and Harlem or their future store in East Aurora, stop in and check them out. And last up here, I'm going to play a quote from my favorite philosopher and physicist. His name's David Deutsch. He's a professor in Oxford. He's the person who came up with a theory for quantum computing and is probably the most profound person I've ever listened to speak. But in this segment, he's talking about what he calls his principle of optimism, which is something that if you understand it, it gives you hope. It's really simple. It's that all problems that do not defy the laws of physics are solvable with the right knowledge. And we should be on a quest to create new knowledge to solve the problems that we're all facing today. In my opinion, the best way to do that is in high trust groups of people. We need groups of people working on problems together, and that starts with community. Here's David Deutsch.
We've been deprived of a lot more than flying cars and Mars colonies. I think civilization is currently burdened by a debilitating pessimism, not just prophecies of doom, because they've always existed. There's something deeper, and prediction without explanation is prophecy. Conventional pessimism is right that civilization has no guaranteed future, nor does our species. The overwhelming majority of civilizations and species that have ever existed are now extinct, including significantly every one of our cousin species, every species that has ever tried to survive by creating knowledge that was not in their genome. How to make clothes and fire and farming and to live the new ways of life that enabled. That is our biological niche to survive through the exercise of creativity. And we are the last species left in that niche. For such species, stasis is not available. We conquer problems by creating knowledge, or they conquer us. So there's nothing new in our situation of all sorts of existential danger. It's undeniable that the worst can happen, because the very worst has already happened many times. All those civilizations who believed that their famines and droughts and disasters were divine punishment for their wickedness or whatever, in reality, it was just that they didn't know enough about irrigation, medicine, and so on. If the ancient Athenians had known about antibiotics or just about hygiene, they could have prevented the plague that contributed to the fall of their nascent optimistic society. And if they had, then as Carl Sagan speculated, we might now be at the stars, and technology would be regulating trivialities like the planetary climate as automatically as it's now regulating the temperature in this room. We know that's possible because of a momentous dichotomy, namely, every transformation of physical systems that is not forbidden by laws of physics is achievable given the right knowledge. And hence, the rational attitude to the future is what I call optimism, the principle of optimism, namely that all evils are caused by lack of knowledge. That isn't a prophecy of success. It's an explanation for failure. If we fail at anything that's physically possible, it's because of some knowledge that we fail to create. Admittedly, some of the dangers that we currently foresee are themselves side effects of knowledge creation. But trying to slow that down won't help, because what do you slow down? In 1900, no one could possibly have foreseen that research in pure physics into the esoteric properties of the element uranium would within 50 years become the centerpiece of everyone's existential fear. In our future too, the greatest dangers will inevitably be unforeseen. And the only type of knowledge that's capable of dealing with those is fundamental knowledge of universal regularities in nature. Any area of fundamental research could suddenly become essential to our survival. Biology, engineering. In World War II, pure mathematics was. We also need knowledge of how to structure human institutions, to retain the miraculous property of keeping civilization stable under rapid change, traditions of criticism and error correction, and we need wealth, meaning the ability to deploy technology in practice. And there's a final consideration. The world doesn't just contain optimists and pessimists, and wise and unwise technology users. It contains enemies of civilization as well. And knowledge is impartial. It can be used for good or evil, but the enemies of civilization all necessarily have one thing in common. They are wrong, and so they fear error correction and truth, and that's why they resist changes in their ideas, which makes them less creative and slower to innovate. So our defense against the existential danger from malevolent uses of technology is speed. The good guys must use their only advantage to stay ahead.